Hello there. Alan Moore is one of the most venerated and respected names in the world of comic books. Ask even the most casual of comic fans, name someone who worked on comics other than Stan Lee, they'll probably say Alan Moore or Frank Miller, but let's not get into him. Not yet, at least. It's hard not to respect Alan Moore. He changed what comics were about, he changed what comics could be about, he wrote some of the most important comic stories in history, and added to the medium's legitimacy. Of course he didn't do it alone. It was an entire movement which involved many different artists and writers, but he arguably stood head and shoulders above the rest, sometimes literally. Also, just look at this guy. You can tell that he's a total character. And that's because he is. He's an actual novelist, an occultist, a musician apparently, a magician. He kind of does look like a version of Gandalf. And he's also an anarchist. I mean, you can't make that stuff up. Kind of makes me wonder if V for Vendetta was some type of self-insert. He's also been on The Simpsons, and that's how you know someone has made it. But like many other great artists that were and still are influential in their field, has Alan Moore actually had a positive effect on comic books? I'm not here to answer that. There are likely too many variables to consider, but perhaps an answer can be found in his 1988 DC work, Batman: The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke is one of those seminal comics that pushed the edge of what could be done with a medium and introduced a new type of maturity to comics and has had a profound impact on the Batman universe within comics and film and animation and video games. That said, The Killing Joke has also been deemed as wildly problematic in subsequent years.
Alan Moore, you wrote my favorite issues of Radioactive Man.
Oh, really? So you like that I made your favourite superhero a heroin-addicted jazz critic who's not radioactive?
Even Alan Moore isn't proud of it. The Killing Joke is a story about Batman and the Joker. It isn't about anything that you're ever going to encounter in real life. Because Batman and the Joker are not like any human beings that have ever lived, so there's no important human information being imparted. Yeah, it was something that I thought was clumsy, misjudged, and had no real human importance. It was just about a couple of licensed DC characters that didn't really relate to the real world in any way. Batman and the Joker's relationship is probably the emotional core of the book, or was probably the intention. But there are other parts that Alan Moore is unhappy with, and we'll get to that soon. This discrepancy seems to be reflected between the comic and the animated film released in 2016. The comic, despite coming under fire over the years, is still seen as a great and important book. The animated film, on the other hand, is not. So I'm going to be looking at the comic book and the film, and seeing what both did right and what both did wrong. Now before I start talking about the story and everything else, let's talk about the colors. The comic was illustrated by Brian Bolland, and his line work is very, very good. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have the time to actually color the comic. So the colours were done by John Higgins, who also did the colours for Watchmen, which is probably Moore's best known work. Bolland never appreciated Higgins' colours, so Bolland recolored the comic himself for the 20th anniversary edition in a more realistic style. Regarding which one is better, I think will ultimately come down to aesthetic preference. I am happy that an artist was able to return and complete his work in his original vision, but honestly, the more realistic style doesn't really improve the story in any way. The only exception that I can think of is probably the Joker's flashback scenes, which were redone in black and white with the limited uses of red, which I do think serve to make the supposed distant memories seem even more distant. But aside from that, this is one work that I prefer to see as it was originally presented. I postulated on how I was going to do this review for a while, and I decided that I would use the animated movie as the spine of my critique, and compare it to Moore's comic when they get to the same scene. Okay, Killing Joke movie, let's see what you got.
First of all, I realize this is probably not how you thought the story would start.
I may as well talk about this for a little bit now. One of the most controversial aspects of the Killing Joke comic is Barbara Gordon's, aka Batgirl's, but you already knew that, paralysis at the hands of the Joker, as well as what happens just afterwards. But we'll talk about it proper when we actually get there. Brian Azzarello, the writer of the animated film's screenplay, apparently decided to add more backstory to Batgirl for said animated movie. Now, conceptually, this is a good idea. The execution, however, well... Barbara Gordon is under Batman's tutelage, and they're both trying to stop crime boss Paris France.
You're kidding.
Okay, that's a standard superhero premise. Depending on how long it is, this could be the right kind of serviceable. It's 25 minutes long. More or less. So in the context of the Killing Joke movie, Batgirl is a decoy protagonist. There are scenes of Batgirl working her day job as a librarian where she talks about her problems with her gay best friend. Apparently she's Batgirl because she wants to get close to Batman, and she's pissy about not getting his attention, and... oh my god, this sucks. What else? Batman takes Batgirl off the case, but Batgirl investigates independently and gets in trouble, so Batman saves her. How the hell did she know where she was there? Batman and Batgirl get into a verbal and physical argument which ends with them having sex.
I find this difficult to masturbate to.
Batman avoids Batgirl and continues the investigation on his own and gets overwhelmed, so Batgirl arrives to save him and she almost beats Paris France to death. So she quits crime fighting. And that's the prologue. I want to smash this thing with a hammer! There is so much wrong with this. First, the cliched dialogue.
And they say the gay scene is complicated. What? The abyss. The place where you don't care anymore. Where all hope dies.
It was fantastic. Like fireworks.
It's so damn clingy. I feel trapped, like I can't move. I need space.
It was just sex, for God's sake. It doesn't have to mean anything. Not like we have to care. I don't care.
It must be that time of the month.
The Killing Joke is one of the most revered works of Batman ever, and this is what you put it together with? What else is terrible about this prologue? Batman and Batgirl fucking. Who the hell thought this was a good idea? The power dynamic is super iffy. Batman is usually depicted as a mentor / father figure to the Bat family, which adds something of a quasi-incest angle. It's gratuitous, the progression of the scene leading up to it sucks. Batman takes Batgirl off the case, she asks why, Batman says that she's not ready, gives his C-tier Bat monologue, she finds this unsatisfying and tries to get a real answer out of him. He pushes her away, they get physical, she pins him down, and then she kisses him, and then she takes off her cowl and the top half of her suit, because it's absolutely necessary that we see her in her bra. So I guess that they just fucked. Right out in the open. What would happen if they got caught? Don't tell your dad about this. Don't be ridiculous. What the hell? Ah! Oh fuck. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Billionaire Bruce Wayne! And the police commissioner's daughter! What a scandal! And what's this down here? Put that down! Yeah, put that down. The Batcowl? One of you is Batman? Bruce Wayne is Batman? Of course, it makes perfect sense. Who else but a billionaire would have the resources to fight crime with gadgets, race cars, and literal jets? This could only get more incredible if the commissioner's daughter was Batgirl! And her father didn't know! Oh my god. Barbara? Yeah, Bruce? Remember how I told you we can't kill people? We have to kill him? Yup. Okay. Uh-oh. I wish that I could say that the scene only sucked here, but unfortunately, the suck also spreads into later parts of the movie, and we'll get there. Oh, and there's also the scene where Barbara sees a small fight between this guy and his girlfriend, and she throws him into the bushes. Are we supposed to be on Batgirl's side? She doesn't know these people. She doesn't know the context of this argument. For all she knew, the woman might have been clingy, and the guy might have been entirely in the right. Batgirl cannot use her bat training to throw some guy she doesn't know and hasn't done anything bad into the bushes just because she's angry at Batman. She committed assault. Even the woman is shocked. The prologue is tacked on, cliched, and unnecessary filler that adds absolutely nothing to the Killing Joke and might even detract.
I don't read the words. I just like when he punches people. How do you make his costume stick so close to his muscles?
Is there anything positive that I can say about the prologue? Tara Strong's voice work as Batman is very strong. She doesn't have much to work with, but it doesn't really hamper her talent. And if I'm being really generous, the prologue has so little impact on the rest of the movie that I guess I can ignore it. And finally, there's only up to go. The most hilarious thing is that you can actually see when the actual portion of the Killing Joke story begins. This shot of rain splashing on the ground is a replicant of the very first panel in The Killing Joke. Now, that may be where the story starts in the comic, but in the movie we get a scene of Barbara jogging through the rain and returning home to answer a call from her dad, and Batman investigates the discovery of several year-old corpses before going to Arkham Asylum. In the comic, there was no dialogue or narration until Batman sat across from the Joker, just sequential art by Brian Bolland. It was wonderfully atmospheric in the comic, but the atmosphere is robbed in the animated movie because of Jim Gordon's incessant talking. Batman wanted to visit the Joker because he's worried that one of them is going to kill the other, or that they'll both kill each other. But then Batman discovers that he's sitting across from an imposter. The Joker has escaped. The only area where I think the animated movie arguably improves over the comic is that in the comic, after Batman learns that the Joker's escaped, we stay on Gordon before we cut to the amusement park that the Joker had purchased. In the movie, we cut to Batman facing the imposter before we cut to the park. During the first scene at the park, we notice that there is a view of the city from the park in the comic, but not the movie. I'll talk about this later. Joker buys this park and kills this man, but we get flashbacks to a possible origin for the Joker where he's an unnamed struggling stand-up comic who quit his job at a chemical plant and is worried about supporting his pregnant wife Jeannie. I'll have more to say about this later. But Mark Hamill is great, not just as the Joker but as this struggling comedian. He still sounds like the Joker, but he's obviously a different person. Hamill was actually instrumental in getting this animated movie going and had actually been trying to do so for years. If nothing else, you must say that Mark Hamill absolutely shines in the movie. I'm going to skip ahead in the comic a little bit, because the next scene is very controversial, and it deserves to have more time spoken about it. Anyway, in this flashback, the comedian is speaking to these gangsters that want him to take him from the chemical plant that he used to work at to the playing card factory next door, and he'll be paid handsomely for his assistance. They also give him a red helmet, which the comedian recognizes to be the one worn by the criminal mastermind, the Red Hood. The gangsters say that there is no Red Hood, and they let any random guy wear the helmet so that they can remain anonymous. But it's really so that they can frame the wearer if they must. I do have to wonder about the timeline in the comic. This comic seems to fit into a then-contemporary late 80s setting, but in these flashbacks, it looks like the comedian is speaking to 40s-era gangsters. Did this happen 40 years ago? How old is the Joker? Or is this just how he remembers this? I definitely wouldn't consider the Joker to be a reliable narrator. Put a pin in this for later, because I do have more to say about the timeline in regards to the movie. Alright. Get comfortable now, because we are going to talk about what is perhaps the most controversial part of the comic. Commissioner Gordon is visiting his daughter and clipping newspapers, but when Barbara opens the door expecting her friend, she instead finds the Joker, who shoots her through her spine, and her goons take her father away as we end the scene on Joker unbuttoning her top. This is a trope called Woman in the Refrigerators, when a female character is injured or killed or maimed, to motivate the male character. For a comic as revered as The Killing Joke, it is rather pathetic that the only thing it can do with its limited number of female characters is to have them be crippled or die. Though, we never actually see Jeannie's body. Now, The Killing Joke was originally just meant to be a one-off comic that was supposed to tell the darkest possible Batman story. Alan Moore did not intend on Batgirl's paralysis being a permanent thing until the New 52's Darkest Reflection. Which actually is a pretty good story, and though it did lead to Oracle, which I do like conceptually, i.e. a character continuing hero work through other means now that they can't rely on their physical strength, and I do think that it can possibly be good representation for disabled people. It wasn't planned and lasted several years, while many male characters are not subjected to that. And I'm all for artists' rights and creative freedom, and I'm not for censoring art in any capacity. Within reason. If you're creating a story about, say, Black Widow that ends with her getting crippled, theoretically, I have no more issue with that than I do with, say, putting Captain America through the same level of brutality. Unless the story sucks. So how does Batgirl's crippling serve the story? Joker hopes to drive Commissioner Gordon mad by subjecting him to intense humiliation and torturing his daughter. From that angle, crippling Batgirl does make some sense story-wise. Many parents will tell you that they'd rather see themselves go through something horrible than any of their children. But if the goal is to drive Gordon Sr. mad, we probably could have used more scenes of Gordon being tortured. As is, when we get to him at the carnival, all we see is him being stripped, zapped, and locked up. Is this really the best that the Joker can do? We also never see how Barbara feels about her paralysis. I know that the idea is that she's that worried about her father's safety, but it helped the story to know how she feels about all of this. I think that it's also telling that Alan Moore himself regrets crippling Barbara. I asked DC if they had any problem with me crippling Barbara Gordon. I spoke to Len Wein, who was our editor on the project. He said, yeah, okay, cripple the bitch. It was probably one of the areas where they should have reined me in, but they didn't. Now, in the comic, The execution of this scene is actually well done. Brian Bolland's art is great. Higgins' colours go from relatively realistic to a suddenly nightmarish and hellish palette, and Alan Moore's dialogue is simply fantastic. It's not as good in the movie though. The actual crippling scene was jarring in the comic. One moment Barbara is hanging out with a stressing father, and just a few panels later, BAM! Paralysis. In the movie, the scene is slow and awkward. They used slow motion, but I think that freeze frame should have been the way to go. The only thing that the movie has going for it is the voice acting and dialogue directly lifted from the comic. And in the animated movie, this is another area where the suck of the prologue spreads into later parts of the movie. During the prologue, we see that Batgirl has the skill to take down Batman, who admittedly was probably holding back. With that in mind, during this scene, it makes it look like that Barbara just let herself get shot. So, great job, Brian Azzarello. You took a plot point that was already subject to legitimate criticism and made it worse. Did you know that he called a fan who criticized the movie script a pussy? Nice. So, Barbara's crippling. Problematic, but arguably does serve the story. But surely there are more effective ways to actually tell that story, right? And there is another facet to this, but we'll get there later. We'll get there. Batman visits Barbara in the hospital. She asks where her father is. We cut to Jim at the Joker's carnival where he's stripped and tortured by circus freaks. The hospital scene is, yet again, an example of the movie not being as good. Barbara sits up in the comic, wraps her arms around Batman. She cries. This is an effective depiction of her fear, confusion, pain, and torture. Bruce uses his real name to greet her, showing his humanity. In the movie, she just lies there. Batman doesn't use his real name. Tara Strong's voice acting is great, but film and comics are a visual medium. Look at how these two different mediums are telling the same story, and say which is taking full advantage of their medium. The movie does get much better whenever the Joker is on screen. Mark Hamill's performance combined with Moore's original dialogue really elevates this movie. We cut to another flashback to Joker's possible origin, where he learns from some police that his wife had died and he tries to pull out of his deal with the gangsters, but they bully him into going through with it. Oh, we don't see the police tell the comedian about his wife in the movie, we just get him telling the gangsters about his wife. We don't see the comedian's reaction to the news. Well, we do from a distance, but we don't hear Mark Hamill's performance in reaction to the news. But strangely, we stay on the gangsters. The gangsters! Doing a great job, Sam Liu! That's right, I haven't mentioned Sam Liu. Sam Liu directed the Killing Joke animated movie, and also directed the animated Gotham by Gaslight movie. By the way, Gotham by Gaslight is a much better animated Batman movie. Now I'm going to make this clear, because I think somebody might get the wrong idea from my review. My issue with the movie is not that it's different from the comic. My issue is that it's not as good as the comic. And also not very good in its own right. I do like the addition to the movie where one of the gangsters shows his gun to the comedian to threaten him. Good job. I actually went back to the comic to make sure I simply didn't miss it, but it wasn't there. Kudos. The movie starts telling the story in somewhat of a different order from the comic. This is because the movie does some adaptation expansion. There's a montage in the comic of Batman fighting some thugs, questioning some prostitutes, and also mob bosses. This montage is expanded so that a few single panels are expanded into entire scenes. And there's also an edition where Gordon is subjected to a kangaroo court, with actual kangaroos, as part of Joker's torture, where he accuses Gotham's police of being hypocrites for working with a vigilante that operates outside the law. This is actually a little profound for this movie, at least. During one of the expanded scenes where Batman questions the prostitutes about Joker's possible whereabouts, they tell Batman that they haven't seen him after he broke out, which they find unusual. Who the hell wants to know about the Joker's sex life? Anyway, one of them speculates that they probably haven't seen the Joker because he might have found a new girl. Okay. Let's go back to Barbara's crippling. Another element of controversy regarding the scene in particular is that though it's not explicit or really implied, some think that in addition to crippling, stripping, and photographing Barbara, the Joker had also raped her. Since it's not explicit in the comic, it's largely open to interpretation, and I guess that it still is in the movie, but the addition of that line removes some of the ambiguity. I don't think that Barbara was raped in the comic. If the intention was to drive Jim Gordon insane, how would raping Batgirl add to that? The dialogue in this scene, though, makes it difficult to think otherwise. So, great job, Brian Azzarello. Another stupid, gratuitous addition. After the scene with the prostitutes, we return to the carnival where the Joker shows Gordon naked photographs of his crippled and bloody daughter. And again, it's not as good or horrible, but the kind of horrible that you want or don't want. We get a good look of the photos in the comic. We can see what's happening. In the movie, the photos just go by, and we don't get a good look of what's supposed to be so horrible. To this movie's, or rather Mark Hamill's credit, we get a song and dance number to accompany this, and wow! I didn't know that Mark Hamill could sing! Okay, I was originally just going to show the clip of the Joker singing the song from the Killing Joke movie. And even though I did edit down the scene and sped it up, it still got a copyright claim, so when the world is full of care, and every headline screams despair, when all is rape, starvation, war, and life is vile, then there's a certain thing I do, which I shall pass along to you, that's always guaranteed to make me smile. Yes! Anyway, the police signal Batman. He arrives to collect some carnival tickets that were sent for him by the Joker, and leaves to confront him. Gordon, meanwhile, is left in a catatonic state after his horrible ride, so Joker orders for him to be locked up. We then cut to the final flashback, and here the movie more or less matches up with the comic again. The comedian as the Red Hood guides the gangsters through the chemical plant, but there's added security, the gangsters are killed, and Batman arrives to confront his old enemy, the Red Hood, who jumps into the water to escape. But the water was polluted with chemicals, and after he removes the helmet, he discovers that his appearance has been permanently changed. Chalk white skin, green hair, and red lips. This, combined with the earlier deaths of his wife and unborn child, the Joker is born laughing. The scene is done very well in both the comic and the movie, but the movie fumbles in that we see too much of Batman. One thing that makes the possible origin work is that it's possible, but not certain. In the movie, Batman is voiced by Kevin Conroy, and he looks the same as he does throughout the rest of the movie. In the comic, we don't really get a good look of Batman, though he kind of does look like Golden Age Batman in this panel. I wonder if that was in Alan Moore's script or if it was purely Brian Bolland. We also have to interpret what Batman sounds like. The movie's version might have worked if the whole confrontation with Batman was seen only from the Red Hood's warped perspective through the Red Hood. But as is, it's fine. Our next scene is actually a pretty smart addition. The circus freaks have been given more screen time in the movie, and they fight Batman when he arrives at the park, where in the comic they just run away. After subduing the freaks, Batman finds the Joker next to the caged Gordon. Joker escapes and Batman unlocks Gordon, who remains sane despite the Joker's cruelty, and orders Batman to bring the Joker in by the book. What the hell? They removed one of my favourite scenes from the comic. It might even be my favourite Joker monologue. There's a scene where Joker and the freaks laugh at the caged Gordon. Joker's nihilism is on full display here as he mocks Gordon and humanity in general. And with this coming right after the final flashback, if true, shows how far this once sympathetic man has fallen. A tragic example of a grief-stricken man succumbing to madness, and now tortures and humiliates his fellow man. Any sympathy that could once be given to this man went away long ago. It's a great scene, and you adapt it out when you've been so obviously desperate for time? Again, the fight with the circus freaks was a smart addition, but you could have kept in Joker's nihilism speech. You could have just said it to Batman as he tried to break out. No, I'm not going to start rewriting the movie. Yet. Batman chases the Joker through a house of mirrors as Joker monologues about the futility of human existence. That anyone that's experienced a bad enough day can break like him, and speculates that Batman himself suffered such a bad day and comes pretty close to the actual answer, while revealing that he himself isn't exactly sure what happened to him, calling the entire flashback that we saw into question. The scene is adapted pretty well in the movie, though I guess Batman just straight up murders this little person. Joker attacks Batman during the second half of the monologue, which works well for a movie, but I'm disappointed that I cut out Joker's speech about telegraph poles. And I really do not like how it takes place in what appears to be a reconstruction of the kitchen where he used to live before his bad day. For the love of my non-existent god, just leave it ambiguous! Batman manages to fight against the Joker and informs him that Commissioner Gordon was not driven insane, and tells the Joker that only he is weak enough to crack. Batman then throws Joker out of the building and approaches his carcass, but the Joker sits up with a terrifying grin and pointing a gun at him. Batman is frozen in shock, but only for a moment. The gun is empty. The Joker surrenders and asks Batman why he doesn't hurt him now. Batman tells him that he's doing it by the book, and that he doesn't want to. Batman tells Joker that they both know they're facing their mutual inevitable demise at each other's hands, and that he doesn't want it to happen. So Batman reaches out to his old enemy. It doesn't have to end like that. I don't know what it was that bent your life out of shape, but who knows? Maybe I've been there too. Maybe I can help. We could work together. I could rehabilitate you. You needn't be out there on the edge anymore. You needn't be alone. We don't have to kill each other. What do you say? No, I'm sorry, but no. It's too late for that. Far too late. You know, it's funny. This situation. It reminds me of a joke. See, there were these two guys in a lunatic asylum, and one night, they decide they don't like living in an asylum anymore. They decide they're going to escape. So, they get onto the roof, and there, just across this narrow gap, they see the rooftops of the town stretching away into the moonlight, stretching away to freedom. Now, the first guy, he jumps right across with no problem, but his friend daren't make the leap. You see, he's afraid of falling. So the first guy has an idea. He says, "Hey, I have my flashlight with me. I'll shine it across the gap between the buildings. You can walk along the beam and join me. But the second guy just shakes his head. He says, what do you think I am, crazy? You just turned it off when I was halfway across. At first, the Joker laughs to himself, but then Batman lets go of a small chuckle, and before too long, they're both laughing like maniacs. They continue laughing as the police arrive, but right before the comic ends, the laughter dies, and the comic ends the same way it started, rain hitting the ground. This is well done in the movie too, but I wish they did the shot of the Joker looking across the water to the city. And since the movie started on a shot of the city, perhaps it should also have ended on a shot of the city. The movie also includes a mid-credit scene of Barbara adjusting to her life in a wheelchair and still fighting crime from a computer. You go, girl. The Killing Joke comic has its problems, but is good, and as you read it, it's obvious how and why it continues to be an influence on the Batman universe, one of the most important works of Batman. The Killing Joke movie has some things going for it, but otherwise, and surprising no one, yeah, it kind of sucks.
Mr. Moore, will you sign my DVD of Watchmen Babies? Which of the babies is your favorite?
You see what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them. Suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
The comic may come across as edgy just for edgy's sake by today's standards, but this was a kind of story that demonstrated what could be done with Batman after decades of Comics Code Authority censorship. Back in 1954, you couldn't do a story where a terrible criminal was given a sympathetic backstory, or where a young woman gets paralyzed and her father gets tortured, or have the villain give long speeches about the futility and pointlessness of human existence. It simply wasn't allowed. Now, admittedly, it does seem as though modern Batman stories have gone into the other direction, going from, you can't do a story as dark as Killing Joke, to, I only want to do a story as dark as Killing Joke. That's something that somewhat stains the Killing Joke's legacy. Alan Moore and other writers opened up the possibilities of what could be done with Batman, but so many subsequent writers seem to just want to emulate these pioneers of darkness. But at least that's something that they want to do, and not something that's mandated by a censor. The Killing Joke not only pushed the limit of what a story could be done with Batman, it also destroyed that limit. Aside from its impact, there's plenty to like about The Killing Joke. Like the art. Brian Bolland's art is fantastic. All of the characters look distinctive and familiar. There are so many iconic shots and images. Brian Bolland has created something both gorgeous and terrifying. And then there's the writing. Alan Moore has written some of the most iconic and memorable dialogue ever spoken by Batman or the Joker. A sympathetic and tragic backstory for the most famous villain in comic books. It's a comic that really went into the Joker's psychology, what makes him tick, nihilism. As he put it, it's all a joke! Everything anybody ever valued or struggled for, it's all a monstrous, demented gag! That's why the Joker dresses like a clown, to reflect how he sees life. A joke, as far as this comic has demonstrated. Each and every scene is iconic, and it's most impressive that it's such a short book, lasting around 50 pages, yet continues to influence not just comics, but beyond. Film director Tim Burton said that he loves The Killing Joke. It's the first comic I ever loved, and it was an obvious influence on the Batman movie he directed that was released in 1989, a year after The Killing Joke was published. The scene of Jack Nicholson in the chemical plant is basically an adaptation of The Killing Joke. Heath Ledger's amazing Oscar-winning performance in The Dark Knight obviously also takes inspiration from The Killing Joke, with Joker making up a new origin for his scars all the time being inspired by Joker's "If I'm going to have a pass, I prefer it to be multiple choice" line. And in Arkham Asylum, you have Joker saying, "Two guys in a lunatic asylum," and sitting on a recreation of his throne from the carnival. But those are only the examples that immediately come to my mind. It'd probably be impossible to create a complete list of what The Killing Joke inspired. It's by no means a perfect story, and I did criticize parts of the book during my review, but it's looked back fondly on for a reason, and will continue to be an influence, for better or for worse. The Killing Joke movie, on the other hand, should be forgotten. Mark Hamill is great, as he always is, as the Joker. To hear him read these legendary lines written by Alan Moore is like a dream come true. He can be sympathetic and terrifying and funny. Definitely the best part of the movie. Tara Strong, though given mostly rubbish to work with, gives a strong vocal performance despite that. The others... Kevin Conroy has supposedly done great work as Batman in the past. I haven't seen the animated series yet, but I have it on Blu-ray, so don't rush me. But here, he's phoning it in. Yes, during the prologue and the actual Killing Joke. And Ray Wise sucks as Jim Gordon. I'm sure that he's been good elsewhere, but not here. The animation is standard DC direct-to-video quality, so pretty good, but considering how big The Killing Joke is, this feels a little inadequate. I know that the prologue gets a lot of and probably all of the hate from this movie, but if the prologue was gone, or even if it was of consistent quality with the rest of the movie, we'd still be calling this a bad movie. And I've gone over my issues with it over this video. First off, what's with the timeline? The movie was released in 2016 and the prologue seems to be consistent with that, but there are laptops and flat-screen televisions, but the actual Killing Joke portion of the movie has very much an 80s feel. I mean, the scene of Jim clipping newspapers is enough to break my suspension of disbelief. And then there's the Joker's flashback scenes. The gangsters look like they're from the 40s, and even the Joker says, "The papers. Pick an error, you fools!" Occasionally there's an intelligent addition, but mostly, every addition feels like padding. And the fact that The Killing Joke was a short book is no excuse. You can make a good movie out of a short story. 2001: A Space Odyssey is one, and you can also make a good standard-length movie out of a really long book. The Harry Potter books run between 2 and 2.5 hours, and the longest Harry Potter book is 800 pages long. And I know that J.K. Rowling sucks as a person, but her work and the work of others which adapt her work hold up despite her transphobic nonsense. Is there actually a good version of this movie? Could it have been saved? I don't see why not. I can think of a few ways to improve the story, and I guess that I can go over a few of them. The most obvious that comes to me is make the antagonist in the prologue the Joker. It makes the prologue more relevant and give the Joker's letter attack on Barbara an element of revenge. The dynamic between the two could be that the Joker sees Barbara as some type of fangirl mascot for Batman who isn't worth his time, and it could potentially be very satisfying to see Barbara be the one to neutralize Joker. Of course, it could also be problematic for this to ostensibly be Barbara's story, but then have Batman take the reins after Batgirl's crippled. I won't deny that, but I do consider it better than what they actually went with. Or maybe cut down the prologue by maybe 50% and expand on other parts of the movie, like say the Joker's flashbacks. Maybe show him screwing up the punchline and getting booed off the stage before he returns to his wife. Maybe after he's strong-armed by the gangsters, he goes to the hospital and sees his wife's deceased body before he goes to the chemical plant. Maybe we see a little bit of what happened after his transformation. Maybe one of the gangsters escaped unharmed before Batman showed up and the Joker followed him home and kills him. Maybe the gangster was a family man with a wife and kids, and despite his line of work was a good husband and father, and the Joker kills his family before killing him. I know this is dark, but it's The Killing Joke. Maybe we can prolong Jim Gordon's torture. Maybe instead of lasting a day, it can last weeks or months. Maybe Barbara recovers enough to leave the hospital and begins to transition into Oracle and uses computers to help Batman find her father and capture the Joker. And think of how triumphant it would feel for Gordon to endure months of torture and still keep his sanity. Maybe the Joker's musical number can be expanded into something like a twisted Disney song that lasts 4 to 5 minutes. If the circus freaks are going to have a fight scene, why not develop them a little bit more? Or barring all of that, why not forget about padding the story and just do the Killing Joke shot for shot and get something the length of a featurette? That'd be perfectly serviceable. Ultimately, I think that the Killing Joke was something that was so innovative, so revolutionary, and so influential, and has touched so many different subsequent Batman works, that an adaptation of the Killing Joke was simply unnecessary. Again, not saying that an adaptation of the Killing Joke can't be good, but not this way. The Killing Joke movie is something that fails to both do justice to its source material and to stand on its own feet. The comic, however, holds up and has my recommendation. It's not for everyone, but it still works 30 years later thanks to its great art, great dialogue, and the characterization of the Joker. But don't take my word for it. Find a copy and decide for yourself. Or maybe not. Alan Moore would probably be happier if you didn't.
Hey, Teacup, why don't you chill out?
Very well. Oh, little Lulu, I love you, Lou, just the same. Ah.